What do Unitarian Universalists believe? That is the question I asked the first time I entered a Unitarian Universalist church. Now, I was not there to worship, nor was I there to learn about Unitarian Universalism with an open mind. Still an evangelical pastor at the time, I left class at the College of Charleston and decided to explore the city a bit. As I passed by the Unitarian Church in Charleston, I noticed the door was open and there was a sign announcing free tours of the historic building. So I entered and quietly made my way throughout the church, marveling at the beautiful ceilings and ornate windows. A woman stood at the front of the sanctuary, directing tourists and answering questions. My question was not about the building, the graveyard, the gardens, or the history of the congregation. I wanted to know what theological beliefs bound this church together. And so I asked, what do Unitarian Universalists believe in? Without thinking about it, almost as if I was not the first condescending evangelical to tour the building and ask this question, she responded, "We believe we do not have a monopoly on the truth." Her response left me immediately aghast. What kind of church doesn't believe that their beliefs are the right beliefs? How could a religion exist without telling its congregants what to believe? Never did I think that one day I would become one of those congregants, and I certainly never thought I would be pursuing an eventual career as a minister in a religious denomination that, instead of demanding its members believe a certain way, encourages them to seek truth and spirituality in the world around us. But one of the things I have come to love most about being a Unitarian Universalist is our willingness to admit that we do not claim exclusive rights to theological truth. We readily admit that there are questions to which we do not have an answer, and we're okay worshiping with people whose religious traditions and theology is not the same as our own. Not long ago, I had a conversation with a friend who expressed some curiosity about my faith as a Unitarian Universalist. Because he was raised in the same religious tradition as I, he was particularly interested in the concept of being Unitarian. Not long after the founding of the modern Pentecostal movement, Pentecostals experienced a Unitarian controversy of their own. In 1913, a group within the Assemblies of God split away over the issue of the Trinity. To this day, Pentecostals are divided into two camps. Trinitarian Pentecostals, who believe in the traditional God in three persons, namely the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We belong to this group. And then there were the oneness, or apostolic Pentecostals. They preached that God existed only in the person of Jesus. Not only did they reject the doctrine of the Trinity, but they also rejected us as fellow Pentecostals, believing that only they held the truth about the Godhead. My friend was concerned that I had become oneness, and he was curious how I could abandon the doctrine of the Trinity. This is our mock-up of our conversation. I assured my friend that Unitarian Universalism was nothing like apostolic Pentecostalism with its narrow, exclusive way of defining God and salvation. Unitarianism, I explained, began as a denial of the Trinity, but as I understand it, it has evolved into an inclusive way of seeing God. When I speak of the unity of God, I'm not making a statement about whether God exists in the form of one or three persons. I'm speaking of an all-encompassing approach to religion. A religious perspective in which the form God takes is irrelevant. Unitarian or Trinitarian, monotheistic, polytheistic, pantheistic. A religious outlook that is not concerned with what we call or how we approach God. A view of God as one, but one in the sense that whether he is called Jehovah, Allah, Brahma, Jesus, or some other name, these are all names for the same universal spirit. The unity of God to me means that truth is not found within a single religion, but that each religious tradition has its own vantage point, offering a unique perspective of God. Whether we approach God through the doors of a church, mosque, synagogue, or temple, we are all approaching the same universal spirit. I was rather pleased with the theological treatise I had written to my friend, but he was less impressed. "I don't really think you believe that," he responded. I went too fast. I responded, "I think I would know better than anyone what I believe." What I thought was a polite discussion of how how both our faiths had evolved since our younger years quickly devolved into a somewhat intense debate about issues of salvation, eternal damnation, and the nature of God. After close to an hour of back and forth debate that I worried would end our friendship, I received this text. You believe your way, I'll believe mine. I responded, that's exactly what I've been saying this whole time. I then responded, thank you. You are now a Unitarian Universalist. Just yesterday, I shared a meme from Reverend Jane's Facebook page that said, an atheist, a pagan, and a Christian walk into a UU church together. We call that Sunday. Yes, one of the greatest aspects of our religious tradition is its openness to diverse ideas, opinions, and theological perspectives. Unitarian Universalist live and let live attitude, however, only goes so far. We are also a people who believe in taking a stand. The phrase standing on the side of love comes from former UUA President William G. Sinkford, who often told reporters that UU supports same-sex marriage because we stand on the side of love. This phrase not only inspired the song we just heard, but it became a call to action for Unitarian Universalists, a multifaceted campaign against all forms of oppression. But in 2016, Reverend Jason Shelton, the writer of the song, changed the lyrics from "We are standing on the side of love" to "We are answering the call of love." In 2017, the Standing on the Side of Love campaign became the Side with Love campaign. These changes happened when accessibility rights activists within the UUA spoke out about the slogan's ableist language. In June 2017, Reverend Teresa Inez Soto presented to the UUA a resolution that urged leaders of the campaign to create a new imagining that better includes and reflects the needs and contributions of disabled people. She wrote, the word standing as default justice language places high value on the justice work and commitments of able-bodied people, while it makes invisible and excludes the justice work of people with a wide range of disabilities and autistic people. Unitarian Universalists are a people who are unafraid to take a stand. If anyone doubts that, we can say we are the only religious denomination who literally took a stand against the word stand. I don't intend to make light of the decision to change the wording in the song and campaign slogan, but to point out that I know of no people who are more willing to take a stand, metaphorically, of course, on an issue than Unitarian Universalists. In an article entitled "Unitarians Are Far from Wishy-Washy," published by The Guardian, writer Rose McDonough wrote, without forcing any theological conclusions on their congregation, Unitarian sermons reflect on philosophical topics such as justice, meaning, love, and death. All this can sound soft and fuzzy, but in America particularly, Unitarian Universalists are known for their history of vociferous support for controversial causes, including immigrant rights, access to abortion, LGBT equality, and environmental protection. Broad principles of reason, compassion, and valuing all people, rather than claims about ultimate truth, are given as the driving force for political action. I would agree, we are certainly not a wishy-washy people. Since the early days of the civil rights movement, we have stood as allies with the Black community and other communities of color, and we continue to take a stand against overt and systemic racism. We stand with women in the fight for equal pay, equal rights, and bodily autonomy. We were among the first religious denominations to ordain gay clergy and to officiate same-sex marriages. We stand for our environment and against actions that destroy the ecosystem. We are not afraid of taking a stand. That is not the question. When exactly do we take a stand, though? That is a question worth considering. When do we say live and let live? And when do we say enough is enough? In one of the first sermons I preached to this congregation way back in August of 2021, possibly still virtually then, I told the story of my great uncle, Alan Platt. Although I try not to reuse sermon anecdotes, especially with the same congregation, I think this story is especially fitting. In 1954, my great-grandfather's brother, my great-great-uncle, Alan Platt, and his wife, Laura, the twin sister of my great-grandmother, lived with their 5 children in a small Indian community in Holly Hill, South Carolina. Despite the overall economic prosperity of the nation at the time, Alan Platt and his family lived in abject poverty. Furthermore, as a native man living in the segregated South, he never knew where he stood or how society would perceive him. Which public restroom should he use? Which water fountain was safe to drink from? These were questions it was best to avoid by remaining isolated among his own people. But he heard about a land of opportunity, a place where there was plenty of work to do and money to make. In the promised land of Florida, Uncle Alan was told that when you're picking oranges, no one cared what color your skin was, which restroom you used, or which fountain you drank from. So Uncle Alan packed up and headed to the land of milk and honey, Florida. At first, it seemed that everything he heard was right. He immediately found work in the orchards, and on the orchards, no one cared whether he was white, black, or Indian. So he rented a home and sent for his wife and 5 children. Since there was no Indian school like his children attended back home, he enrolled them in the local white school. It seemed he had found heaven on earth. But just a few days later, there was a knock on his door. When he opened the door, Sheriff Willis McCall entered his home and demanded he wake his 5 children. The sheriff then proceeded to put each of the children through what he called a scientific test to determine their race. After measuring their noses, examining their skin, and plucking strands of their hair, the sheriff ruled that Uncle Alan and his children were not Indian, but black, and therefore were not allowed to attend school with white children. Most others in his situation would have packed their bags and gone back home. But Uncle Alan decided to stay and fight. Instead of going back home or bowing to the sheriff and community, he found a local newspaper editor who publicized his story, which led to an attorney taking the case. Over the next year, he faced intimidation and harassment. He was evicted from his home when Klan members threatened to bomb his house if he was not evicted. But he continued to fight until a circuit court ruled in his favor. His Indian children would be allowed to attend the all-white school. His case made national news, putting him and his family on the cover of Jet magazine. The ultimate victory for him was when he was able to say to the school officials that denied his children an education, "My children can go to school here, but they won't." A wealthy donor had heard of his story and offered to fund his children's education at an elite private school where they all eventually finished their education. I've asked myself, what was it about this experience that transformed my humble uncle into a fearless fighter against injustice? This wasn't his first experience with racism and oppression. He was a brown man living in the Deep South. He had struggled his entire life, kept down by the shackles of systemic racism. But it was one thing to experience discrimination at the job, the voting booth, or a public water fountain. It was one thing to be demeaned with racial slurs on the street. This time, racism and injustice had come knocking on his door. This time, it had broken down the barrier, invaded his only safe space, and placed its hands literally upon him and his children. This, I believe, is where most of us draw the line and take a stand. This is where we shift from passive to active, when an idea, belief, or opinion is just that, an idea, belief, or opinion. I will listen to it. I will consider it. I will support your right to share it. But when your idea, belief, or opinion brings about actions, creates policies, or promotes agendas that oppress and marginalize others, then I must take a stand. Last summer, we witnessed women losing their bodily autonomy as the Supreme Court struck down Roe. At the same time, a sitting Supreme Court justice boldly suggested reconsidering rulings that have granted rights to contraception access, same-sex relationships, and same-sex marriage. Injustice is not something that exists out there somewhere, something that we hear about but never see for ourselves. No, injustice has come knocking at our door. Like the entitled racist sheriff my great uncle dealt with, injustice has walked right in the house. It has placed its hands on the hands of my 3 daughters and women all across this nation. Injustice stands threatening my happiness, my equality, and I fear more and more each day, it threatens my life. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I am not suggesting that it's okay to be laid back and unconcerned about an issue until that issue affects you. By no means. As Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. What I'm saying is that we should be open to other views, even views that challenge our own. But when what you stand for infringes upon the rights of others, when it causes harm to already oppressed and marginalized people, when it threatens the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the stability of our climate, then I too must take a stand. I stand for the earth. I stand for full equality for LGBTQ people. I stand as an ally to any group that is oppressed and disenfranchised. Several months ago, I had a sit down with my congressional representative, Earl Buddy Carter. After I learned he had voted against the Respect for Marriage Act, I requested this meeting specifically to ask him why he felt I was less deserving of equal rights than other citizens. He responded with a well-rehearsed talking point about religious freedom and fears of ministers being forced to officiate gay weddings. Expecting this, I explained why his argument made no sense. Same-sex marriage is legal now, and no one is forcing churches to host or ministers to officiate. We went back and forth for some time, Representative Carter frequently assuring me that he is not against my right to marry, despite having just voted against it, until I finally said, I don't believe you. He then made what I believe was his only somewhat valid point. He said, this bill did not give you the right to marry. The Supreme Court already did that. This bill is just political posturing by the Democrats. Why are you questioning my motivation, but not theirs? To this, I replied, motives are irrelevant. I am more concerned with results. The result of their action was to expand upon my freedoms. The result of your action was to limit my freedom, and that is what matters. I wish I could eradicate racism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, sexism, and every other form of bigotry and discrimination, but I cannot. I cannot stop someone from harboring racist ideas and feelings, but I can speak up when someone says something racist in my presence. When I see racism, whether subtle or overt, in the institutions that make up our community, our economy, and our nation, even if it does not directly impact me, I have to take a stand. I believe in showing respect for the religious beliefs of others, even when they're contrary to my own. But when those religious beliefs put members of the LGBTQ community in danger of losing their lives or freedoms, I have to say, here's where I stand. I wish there were a pill to cure homophobia and transphobia. Sadly, there is not. What we can do is to stand as members or allies with the LGBTQ community, making our voices heard whenever the community is used to stoke fear and hate, when legislation is passed targeting our freedoms. Last year, as I was beginning to learn guitar, one of the first songs I learned was Amazing Grace. And thinking about that song caused me to kind of think about where I came from as a former evangelical to now being a hopefully future Unitarian Universalist minister. And questioning, when did I finally get over the beliefs that I was raised in? Sorry, one moment, I lost my place. I pinpointed the moment that I began to experience what I call salvation. I pinpointed it to a time of the first birthday I had after coming out. On a Wednesday night after leaving the ministry, I called my mother and said to her the words, I am not saved anymore. My mother did not take this well. For several months, she refused to speak to me other than to tell me that I needed to be saved. As my birthday drew near, I expected that would be the day we would mend our relationship. For as long as I can remember, my mother always made it a point to be the first person every year to tell me happy birthday. That year, on the morning of August 9th, my phone did not ring. I waited all day for a phone call I never received. When I came home from work that evening, I checked my email and saw my mother's name in my inbox. But instead of a happy birthday email, I read a very angry and hurtful message that ended by telling me that I needed to be saved. To distract myself from what I was feeling, I invited some friends over to watch a movie. The only DVD I owned was the 2003 low-budget movie that I still hail as one of my all-time favorite movies. It's entitled Camp. If you have not seen it, clear your schedule tonight and watch it. Without spoiling the plot too much, it's about a group of incredibly talented but socially awkward teenagers who don't fit in anywhere except one place, Camp Ovation, a summer musical theater camp. One particular camper almost misses out on camp because her father wants her to go to weight loss camp instead. She's only able to convince her father to allow her to go to Camp Ovation by agreeing to have her jaw wired shut for the summer. Unable to sing and hardly able to talk, we don't really get to know this character very well until the end of the movie. As the campers are preparing for their final performance before their parents, the community, and special guest who happens to be in the audience, Stephen Sondheim, one of the singers is unable to perform, and the camp director calls upon Jenna to take her place. With jaws still wired shut, Jenna mumbles, "But my parents are here." With wire cutters in his hand, the director answers, it's time they get to know their daughter. The song Jenna then sings to a captive audience, and especially to her parents, spoke to my situation. Here's where I stand. Here's who I am. The character in the movie demanded acceptance from her parents, but at the same time, and more importantly, her song is an expression that she has finally taken a stand and fully accepted herself as she is. Later that night, I responded to my mother's email with a link to Jenna's song. My brother later told me that she listened to it over and over. I wish I could say it had an instant effect, but the mending of our relationship took years. That is okay. I didn't send the email to demand acceptance from her. I sent it to take a stand for myself. Like the character in the movie, I came to the realization that just as Jenna could not change her parents' view of her weight, I could not control what my mother thought about my sexual orientation. But when other people's beliefs harm me, my community, and those with whom I am allied, that is when I must say, here's where I stand. Amen. May it be so.